The ivory wedding dress had already started collecting dust from the Oklahoma wind by the time Nora Louise realized Thomas wasn't coming through those church doors. She stood at the altar of the little wooden chapel in Tahlequah, her bouquet of wildflowers trembling in her grip, watching the pitying faces of the congregation slowly morph from anticipation to uncomfortable silence. The preacher cleared his throat for the third time, his weathered face creasing with concern as he glanced between Nora and the empty doorway where her groom should have appeared 15 minutes ago. "Miss Louise, perhaps we should." The preacher began, but Nora raised her hand to stop him. "Just give him a few more minutes," she whispered, though her voice cracked on the last word. But those few minutes stretched into a half hour, and then the whispers started. Someone had seen Thomas riding out of town at dawn with his saddlebags packed. Someone else mentioned seeing him at the saloon the night before, looking troubled and drinking heavy. Nora's best friend Martha finally climbed the steps to the altar and gently took her arm. "Honey, I think we need to accept that he's not coming," Martha said softly, her eyes brimming with tears for her friend. Nora looked out at the assembled guests, at Thomas's empty family pew, at her own father who had died 2 years prior and couldn't be there to give her away, at her mother who had passed when she was just a girl. Her Aunt Judith sat in the front row, the woman who had raised her but never really loved her, already gathering her things with an expression that said she'd expected this outcome all along. The walk down that aisle was the longest of Nora's life. Every step in her carefully saved for wedding dress felt like trudging through mud. The pitying looks burned worse than any slap. Outside the chapel, the June sunshine of 1876 felt like mockery. The town of Tahlequah bustled on as normal, completely indifferent to her humiliation. "Well, I certainly can't take you back in," Aunt Judith announced the moment they were outside. "I've already rented out your room to the new schoolteacher. Besides, you're 22 years old, Nora, old enough to have made this mess, old enough to figure your way out of it." "But I didn't make this mess," Nora protested, her voice rising. "Thomas is the one who ran off. You clearly couldn't keep him interested enough to show up to his own wedding," Judith sniffed. "That speaks volumes about your inadequacies as a woman. I've done my Christian duty raising you after your mother passed. I won't be extending my charity any further." Martha grabbed Nora's hand. "She can stay with me and Daniel for a while," but Judith shook her head. "Daniel already told me yesterday he doesn't want the imposition." "Apparently you're already expecting your first child, Martha. You don't need another mouth to feed." The color drained from Martha's face, confirming the truth. She looked at Nora apologetically. "I wanted to tell you after the wedding. I'm so sorry, Nora." Nora felt the world tilting beneath her feet. No home, no husband, no money of her own. Thomas had worked at the mill and she'd been helping her aunt with sewing, but Judith had kept all the money Nora earned, claiming it went toward her room and board. In the span of an hour, she'd gone from bride to destitute. "What am I supposed to do?" Nora asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "That's your concern now, not mine," Judith said flatly, already walking toward her buggy. Nora stood in front of the church, still in her wedding dress as the guests dispersed. Some offered sympathetic looks but no actual help. Others seemed eager to get away from the spectacle. Within 20 minutes, the street had cleared and Nora was alone. She sat down on the church steps, her dress pooling around her, and finally let the tears come. She didn't know how long she'd been crying when she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. Looking up through blurred vision, she saw a rider on a paint horse coming down the main street. He was tall in the saddle, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, probably not much older than herself, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. The rider slowed as he approached the church, his eyes taking in the sight of Nora in her wedding dress, sitting alone on the steps with tears streaming down her face. He brought his horse to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice carrying a gentle drawl. "Are you all right?" Nora laughed bitterly. "Do I look all right?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "No, madam, you don't. Can I help you with something?" "Unless you can conjure up a groom or a place to live, I don't think anyone can help me," Nora said, wiping at her eyes. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing a kind face with warm brown eyes that held genuine concern. "I'm Xander Quinn. Just rode into town to pick up some supplies before heading back to my ranch. What happened here?" Something about his straightforward manner made Nora tell him everything. The words poured out, Thomas leaving her at the altar, her aunt refusing to take her back, having nowhere to go and no money to her name. Xander listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then he looked at her directly. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Louise, Nora Louise. Miss Louise. I run a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here. It's not much, just me and my younger brother Xander managing about 200 head of cattle. Our mother passed last winter, and the place has been falling apart without a woman's touch. We need help with cooking, mending, keeping the house. I can offer you room, board, and fair wages. It's honest work and you'd be safe there." Nora stared at him. "You're offering me a job. You don't even know me." "I know you've had a terrible day and need help," Xander said simply. "I know you're willing to work, based on what you said about sewing for your aunt. And I can see you're a decent person who's been dealt a bad hand. Sometimes in life, we all need someone to extend a hand when we're down. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Xander's expression grew distant. "My mother was left stranded once before she met my father. A kind family took her in and gave her work. She always said that kindness saved her life. She made me and my brother promise we'd always help those in need if we were able. I'm able right now and you're in need. Seems straightforward to me." Nora considered his offer. Going with a strange man to an isolated ranch would normally be unthinkable, but what choice did she have? She could try to find work in town, but Tahlequah was small, and everyone would know about her humiliation by nightfall. The pitying looks and gossip would be unbearable. At least at a ranch she'd have work and dignity. "I don't want charity," she said firmly. "If I come, I work for my keep. Real wages, like you said." "Fair enough," Xander agreed. $20 a month plus room and board, that's fair wages for a housekeeper." $20 a month was more than her aunt had ever given her. Nora stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. "All right, Mr. Quinn, I'll come with you. Just Xander, please." He glanced at her dress. "We should probably get you out of that wedding dress first. Is there somewhere you can change?" Nora's few possessions were still at her aunt's house. The thought of going back there made her stomach turn, but she needed her clothes. "My things are at my aunt's place, 2 streets over the yellow house. I'll take you there. You can ride with me." Xander helped her onto his horse, and Nora was acutely aware of being pressed against his back as they rode the short distance. When they arrived at Judith's house, her aunt was on the porch, already boxing up Nora's belongings. "I figured you'd be back for these," Judith said coldly, not even looking up. "Take them and go." Nora changed quickly inside, emerging in a simple brown traveling dress. Her possessions fit into one small trunk and a carpet bag. Xander loaded them onto his horse without comment. As they prepared to leave, Judith finally spoke again. "You're making a mistake going off with a strange man, But then, you've always had poor judgment. Nora felt anger flare in her chest. My only mistake was believing the people who claimed to care about me actually did. Goodbye, Aunt Judith. They rode back through town to the general store, where Xander picked up his supplies. Nora waited outside, hyper-aware of the stares and whispers. She saw Martha across the street and waved, but Martha looked away uncomfortably. The betrayal stung, even though Nora understood. This town had nothing for her now. By the time they left Tahlequah, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Xander had borrowed a wagon from the general store to carry his supplies and Nora's trunk, and she sat beside him on the bench seat as they headed north. The Oklahoma landscape stretched out in rolling hills covered in prairie grass and scattered trees. "Tell me about your ranch," Nora said, needing to fill the silence. "It's called the Triple Q after my father, Quinn's quarter horses," Xander explained. "Though we mostly run cattle now. My father died 5 years ago in a riding accident. My brother Xavier was only 16 then, I was 21. We've been running the place together since. It's hard work, but it's home." "You said your mother passed last winter," his jaw tightened. "Pneumonia. It came on fast." By the time we could get a doctor out from town, it was too late. He was quiet for a moment. "The house hasn't felt the same since. Xavier and we're good with cattle and horses, but we're not much for cooking or keeping house. Place has gotten pretty rough." "I'm sorry about your mother," Nora said softly. "Thank you. She was a good woman, strong. She had to be living out here." He glanced at Nora. "It's an isolated life. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles east. Town is 15 miles. In winter, we can go weeks without seeing anyone but each other. Some women find that too lonely." "Lonely sounds peaceful right now," Nora admitted. "I could use some distance from people and their opinions." Xander nodded. "That's understandable given today." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Nora found herself studying Xander from the corner of her eye. He had strong, capable hands on the reins and sat tall with an easy confidence. His profile was handsome in a rugged way, with a straight nose and firm jaw. She noticed a scar above his left eyebrow and wondered about its origin. "Can I ask you something?" Nora ventured. "Why aren't you married? You must be, 26? 27, he corrected. "And I suppose I've been too busy keeping the ranch going to think much about courting. There was a girl once back when I was 20. Sarah Mitchell. But she married a banker from Tulsa instead. Said she couldn't handle ranch life." He shrugged. "Turned out for the best. I needed someone who could handle the hard parts of this life, and she wasn't that person." "Do you get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I've got Xavier and the work keeps me occupied. What about you?" "Had you been with Thomas long?" Nora sighed. 2 years. We met at a church social. He seemed steady, reliable. He had a good job at the mill. I thought I knew him." Her voice went bitter. "Obviously, I didn't know him at all." "His loss," Xander said simply. "Any man who'd leave a woman at the altar isn't worth your tears." "I'm not crying for him anymore," Nora said, surprised to realize it was true. "I'm crying for what I thought I had, the future I planned. It's hard to let that go." "You'll build a different future," Xander said. "Maybe a better one." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, they crested a hill and Xander pointed ahead. "There's the Triple Q." The ranch spread out in the valley below. A 2-story wooden house sat at the center, weathered but sturdy looking. A large barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings and a corral where Nora could see horses moving in the twilight. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. It looked remote and wild, but there was something appealing about it too, something honest and real. As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn. He was clearly Xander's brother, with the same dark hair and tall build, though his face was more boyish at 21. "You're back late," Xavier called, then stopped short when he saw Nora. "And you brought company." Xander helped Nora down from the wagon. "Xavier, this is Miss Nora Louise. She's going to be our new housekeeper. Miss Louise, my brother Xavier." Xavier looked completely baffled. "Housekeeper? Since when were we hiring a housekeeper?" "Since now. Help me get her trunk inside and I'll explain everything." The inside of the house proved Xander hadn't exaggerated about needing help. Dirty dishes filled the kitchen basin. Dust covered every surface. Men's clothing was strewn across chairs. The whole place had the stale smell of a house unlived in, merely occupied. Nora felt something settle in her chest at the sight. Here was something she could fix, something she could control. After a day of helplessness, the prospect of useful work was oddly comforting. "I apologize for the state of things," Xander said, looking embarrassed. "We've let it go." "It's fine," Nora said. "I've seen worse." That wasn't entirely true, but it seemed kind to say. "Where will I be sleeping?" "Mother's room," Xander said. "Upstairs, second door on the left." "We haven't touched it since." "Well, since. Clean sheets are in the linen closet, or they were. They might need washing." "I'll take care of it," Nora said. While the brothers unhitched the wagon and tended the horses, Nora climbed the stairs. Her mother's room was frozen in time, personal items still on the dresser, the bed made but dusty. Nora felt like an intruder at first, but she pushed past it. Mrs. Quinn would probably be happy someone was using this room again rather than letting it sit empty as a shrine. She found sheets in the closet, musty but usable after a good airing. By the time she'd made the bed and unpacked her few belongings, night had fully fallen. Downstairs, she could hear the brothers talking in low voices. She descended to find them in the kitchen, Xander apparently explaining the day's events to his brother. "Let me get started on some supper," Nora said. "What do you have for food?" The answer was depressing. Some dried beans, salt pork, flour, and coffee. She managed to put together a simple meal of beans and cornbread, better than the cold jerky the brothers admitted they'd been living on. As they ate at the rough kitchen table, Nora felt 3 pairs of eyes watching her. "This is the best meal we've had in months," Xavier said enthusiastically. "You can really cook." "It's just beans," Nora protested. "Yeah, but they're good beans," Xavier insisted. "And the cornbread isn't burned, that's a miracle." Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling. "The bar seems pretty low." "You have no idea," Xander said dryly. "Xavier once set water on fire. Don't ask me how." As they ate, Nora began to relax slightly. The brothers were easy company, their affection for each other evident in their gentle ribbing. They treated her with respect, keeping a polite distance. After supper, she insisted on washing the dishes while they saw to the evening chores. Later, alone in her room, Nora finally processed everything that had happened. This morning, she'd woken up expecting to become Mrs. Thomas Walker. Now she was sleeping in a dead woman's bed on a remote ranch with 2 strange men. Her wedding dress hung in the small closet, a ghost of the day's humiliation. She should probably feel afraid or uncertain. Instead, she felt something like relief. Here, no one knew about her shame. Here, she could be useful and earn her own money. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but Xander was right. Maybe it could be a better one. Over the following days, Nora threw herself into work. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, washed every piece of fabric she could find, and organized the chaos into order. She mended the brothers' worn clothes, darned their socks, and began cooking proper meals. The pantry was poorly stocked, but she made do with what was available, planning a list of supplies for the next trip to town. The brothers were gone most days, working the cattle. Nora appreciated the solitude, the chance to think without constant reminders of her failed wedding. But she also found herself looking forward to evenings when they'd return, dusty and tired, grateful for hot food and clean clothes. Xander proved to be a man of his word. At the end of her first week, he paid her $5, a quarter of her monthly wages. "In case you need anything personal from town," he explained. "Xavier and I are going in tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to come along if you want." Nora's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing Tahlequah again made her stomach clench, but she couldn't hide forever. "I'll come," she said. "I have a list of things we need for the kitchen." The trip to town the next day was tense for Nora. She sat between the brothers on the wagon bench, trying to appear confident as they rolled down Tahlequah's main street. People stared. Whispers followed them. Nora held her head high, refusing to show how much it bothered her. At the general store, the clerk looked at her with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Louise, I heard you'd left town." "I'm working at the Triple Q now," Nora said evenly. "I need these supplies." She handed over her list, aware of Xander standing supportively behind her. The clerk filled the order without comment, though his eyes kept darting between Nora and Xander with poorly concealed speculation. Outside, they nearly ran into Martha and her husband Daniel. Martha's eyes widened. "Nora, I was so worried about you." "Were you?" Nora couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "You didn't seem very worried when you turned away." Martha flushed. "I'm sorry. Daniel said it would be inappropriate for you to stay with us, what with the baby coming and all, but I felt terrible about it." "It's fine," Nora said, meaning it. "I've found a good position at the Quinn Ranch. I'm doing well." Daniel looked at Xander with open suspicion. "Is that proper? A single woman living with two bachelors?" Xander's expression went cold. "Miss Louise is our housekeeper, and she's treated with complete respect. Unless you're suggesting otherwise." Daniel backed down quickly. No, just concerned for propriety." "Your concern is noted and unneeded," Nora said sharply. "Good day, Martha." As they walked away, Xavier muttered, "What a jackass." "Xavier," Xander chided, but Nora caught him hiding a smile. They finished their shopping and headed back to the ranch. On the ride home, Xavier asked, "Does it bother you, the gossip?" "Of course it bothers me," Nora admitted. "But what can I do about it? People will talk regardless. At least at the ranch, I don't have to hear it." "For what it's worth, I think Thomas Walker is an idiot," Xavier said. "And his loss is our gain. The house has never looked better, and I've never eaten so well." "Careful," Xander warned his brother. "You'll give Miss Louise a swelled head." But Nora noticed that Xander's eyes were warm when he looked at her, and something in her chest fluttered in response. As June gave way to July, Nora settled into ranch life. She learned the rhythms of the place: early mornings, hard work, simple pleasures. She discovered she enjoyed the isolation, the vast Oklahoma sky, the way the prairie changed colors as the day progressed. The brothers taught her to ride, first on the gentle mare named Daisy, then gradually on livelier horses. Xander proved to be a patient teacher. He'd ride beside her, offering quiet encouragement when she got nervous, praise when she did well. Nora found herself watching him more and more. The easy way he sat a horse, the gentle firmness with which he handled the animals, the rare but devastating smile that transformed his serious face. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude. He'd saved her when she had nowhere to go. But gratitude didn't explain the way her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched, or how she found herself listening for his footsteps on the porch each evening. One sweltering afternoon in mid-July, Nora was in the kitchen making preserves from the wild berries she'd found near the creek. The heat from the stove combined with the summer temperature made the room unbearable. She'd rolled up her sleeves and pinned up her hair, but sweat still trickled down her neck. Xander came in for water and stopped short. "You shouldn't be working in this heat. It's too much." "The berries won't wait," Nora said, stirring the bubbling pot. "They'll spoil if I don't preserve them now. At least take a break. You'll make yourself sick." "I'm fine, Xander. I've worked in worse conditions." He frowned but didn't argue, just filled his canteen and left. But 20 minutes later he returned with Xavier. "We're taking over," Xander announced. "You're going to rest." "You can't make preserves," Nora protested. "You're going to teach us. Come on, Miss Louise. You've been running yourself ragged since you got here. Let us help." There was something touching about the two tall cowboys standing in the kitchen, looking determined despite their obvious uncertainty. Nora relented, instructing them on stirring and temperature while she sat at the table with a glass of cool water. "See, we're not completely hopeless," Xavier said proudly when the preserves were successfully jarred. "Just mostly hopeless," Xander added, making Nora laugh. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Xander said quietly, "You know you don't have to work yourself to death to earn your place here, right? You've more than proven your worth." "I just want to pull my weight," Nora said. "You do more than that. This place feels like a home again, not just a house. That's because of you." Their eyes met, and Nora felt that flutter again, stronger this time. In the golden evening light, Xander's face was open and sincere, and she realized with sudden clarity that she was falling for him. The thought should have terrified her. Just 2 months ago, she'd been about to marry another man. But Thomas felt like a lifetime ago, a different person's story. Xander must have seen something in her expression because his own face changed, became more intense. He leaned slightly closer and Nora's breath caught. But then Xavier burst out of the house, complaining about a problem with one of the cattle, and the moment shattered. Later that night, alone in her room, Nora pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. What was she doing? She'd sworn off men after Thomas's betrayal. She'd promised herself she'd focus on work and independence. But Xander wasn't like Thomas. He was steady, kind, honest. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way Thomas had never managed. The next morning brought a new distraction. A neighbor from the ranch to the east, a gruff cattleman named Pete Morrison, rode over to warn them about rustlers in the area. Several ranches had lost cattle in recent weeks. "Keep your eyes open," Pete advised. "They're getting bolder. Hit the Johnson place in broad daylight last week." After Pete left, Xander and Xavier decided to move their herd closer to the house where they could watch them better. It meant long days for both brothers, often staying out overnight to guard the cattle. Nora found herself worrying every time Xander rode out. Her stomach knotted with anxiety until he returned safely. One night, Xander came back alone near midnight. Xavier had stayed out with the herd. Nora had waited up, unable to sleep until she knew he was home safe. She met him at the door with hot coffee. "You shouldn't have waited up," Xander said, but his eyes were grateful. "Couldn't sleep anyway," Nora said. "Everything quiet out there. For now, but I don't like it. These rustlers are getting too close." He sank into a kitchen chair, exhausted. Nora moved behind him without thinking and began kneading the tight muscles of his shoulders. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed with a grateful sigh. "That feels amazing," he murmured. They stayed like that for several minutes, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the crackle of the stove. Nora's hands worked the knots from his shoulders, and she was acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment, the warmth of his body under her fingers. "Nora," Xander said suddenly, his voice rough. He'd never used her first name before. "I need to tell you something." Her hands stilled. "What is it?" He turned to face her, capturing her hands in his. "I know you came here because you had nowhere else to go. I know you've been through hell." But I need you to know that having you here, it's been. He struggled for words. You've become important to me, more than just as our housekeeper, and if that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Xander, You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know it's too soon. You probably need time after what Thomas did. I just needed you to know. Because every time I ride out, I think about coming back to you, and that's gotten to mean more to me than it probably should. It's not too soon, Nora whispered. What I felt for Thomas was nothing compared to this. He was safe, predictable. With you, I feel alive and terrified. Because what if this is another mistake? Xander stood, still holding her hands. I can't promise everything will be perfect. But I can promise I'll never lie to you, never abandon you. If we do this, if we give this a chance, I'm all in. That's who I am. I know, Nora said. That's why I'm falling for you. His eyes blazed with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as Nora responded. Her hands slid up to his shoulders and his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss felt like coming home, like every missing piece sliding into place. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for weeks. Me too, Nora admitted. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms, swaying slightly, until the sound of hoofbeats outside made them jump apart. Xavier came through the door moments later, looking exhausted. Xander, we've got. Oh, he stopped, looking between them with sudden understanding. A slow grin spread across his face. Well, it's about damn time. I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other. Xander's ears reddened. What do you need, Xavier? I saw something moving near the north pasture. Might be nothing, might be our rustler friends. Thought you should know. The brothers grabbed their rifles and headed back out, leaving Nora alone with her whirling thoughts. She touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the pressure of Xander's kiss. Everything was moving so fast, but it felt right in a way her engagement to Thomas never had. The rustlers struck 2 nights later. Nora woke to the sound of gunshots and ran to the window. In the moonlight, she could see figures on horseback scattering the cattle, while Xander and Xavier tried to stop them. Fear clawed at her throat as more shots rang out. She pulled on her wrapper and ran downstairs, lighting every lamp she could find to illuminate the yard. The light seemed to startle the rustlers, giving the brothers an advantage. Within minutes, the thieves were fleeing, though they'd managed to scatter part of the herd. Xander and Xavier returned to the house as dawn broke, dusty and exhausted but unharmed. Nora threw her arms around Xander without thinking, and he held her tight. We're all right, he murmured into her hair. We're both all right. You could have been killed, Nora said, her voice shaking. But we weren't, and they didn't get any cattle, thanks to your quick thinking with the lights. Over breakfast, they discussed the situation. The rustlers would likely try again, and the brothers couldn't guard the entire ranch alone. Xavier suggested hiring some hands, but Xander was reluctant to spend the money. What about the law? Nora asked. Can't the sheriff help? The sheriff is in Tahlequah, 15 miles away, Xander said. By the time we rode for him, the rustlers could strike and be gone. No, we need to handle this ourselves. Over the next week, the brothers took turns on watch while Nora kept the house running. The strain was wearing on all of them. Xander grew quieter, more intense. Nora could see the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the fear that he might lose the ranch his father had built. One afternoon, while Xander was out checking fences and Xavier was sleeping after his night watch, Nora decided to explore the attic. She'd been meaning to look for extra blankets for the coming winter. Instead, she found boxes of Mrs. Quinn's things, carefully packed away, Unable to resist, she looked through them. Dresses, photographs, letters. One photo showed a younger Xander with his parents, his mother a handsome woman with kind eyes. Nora traced the image, feeling a strange connection to this woman she'd never met. At the bottom of one box, she found a journal. She knew she shouldn't read it, but curiosity won out. The entries were sporadic, documenting ranch life, worries about money, pride in her sons. One entry from 5 years ago caught Nora's attention. Xander blames himself for his father's death, Mrs. Quinn had written. He thinks if he'd checked that fence line like he was supposed to, Quinn wouldn't have been riding that section when the stallion spooked. I've told him 100 times it wasn't his fault, that accidents happen, but he carries guilt like a stone. I pray someday he'll forgive himself and allow himself to be happy. Nora's heart ached for Xander. She understood now the driven quality he had, the way he pushed himself so hard. He was still trying to make up for a death that wasn't his fault. That evening she found him on the porch, staring out at the darkening prairie. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I found your mother's journal in the attic," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have read it." Xander tensed. "What did it say?" "That your father's death wasn't your fault, that you needed to forgive yourself." She took his hand. "Xander, accidents happen. You can't blame yourself forever." "I was supposed to check that fence," he said, his voice raw. "It was my job and I forgot." He rode out instead, and that damn stallion threw him into the rocks. He died because I couldn't remember to do my damn job. "You were 21 years old," Nora said firmly. "Young and human and capable of mistakes. Your mother knew that. She wanted you to be happy, not to spend your life punishing yourself." Xander's hand tightened on hers. "Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve to be happy. Like I owe it to him to just keep working, keep the ranch going, never stop to actually live." "That's not what he would have wanted," Nora said. "Parents want their children to have good lives. Your mother wrote that she prayed you'd forgive yourself. Don't make her prayers go unanswered." Xander turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just someone who cares about you and hates seeing you hurt." She cupped his face in her hands. "You're a good man, Xander Quinn. You saved me when I had nothing. You work yourself to the bone for this ranch and your brother. You deserve happiness. You deserve love." "Do you love me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nora's breath caught. It was too soon, too fast. She'd known him barely 2 months, but when she looked in her heart, the answer was clear. "Yes, I love you." Xander kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you too. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on those church steps. You looked so lost and brave at the same time. I wanted to fix everything for you." "You did," Nora whispered. "You gave me a home when I had none. Purpose when I felt worthless. And now, love when I thought I'd never trust anyone again." They sat on the porch until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about everything and nothing. Nora told him about her childhood, her mother's death, the loneliness of living with an aunt who saw her as a burden. Xander shared memories of his parents, his fears about keeping the ranch afloat, his dreams for the future. "I always wanted a family," he admitted. "Not just me and Xavier running this place, but a wife and children. A house full of life and laughter again. After Sarah chose the banker, I told myself it didn't matter, but it did, it does." "It could still happen," Nora said carefully. "Could it, with you?" His eyes searched hers. "Maybe. If you wanted it to." "I want it more than anything," Xander said. "But Nora, you just escaped one wedding. I don't want to rush you into something you're not ready for." "I'm not rushing," Nora said. "I'm choosing. There's a difference. With Thomas, I was settling. Following the path I thought I should take. With you, I'm following my heart." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and Nora felt a peace she'd never known. This was right. This was real. The next morning, Xavier took one look at them and grinned. "So, are we planning a wedding or what?" Xander threw a biscuit at him. "Mind your own business." "Your happiness is my business, brother. Besides, if you two get married, maybe Nora will finally be my sister officially instead of just in my heart." Nora felt tears prick her eyes at Xavier's words. She'd gained more than a job at the Triple Q. She'd gained a family, but their happiness was interrupted by Pete Morrison riding in with news. The rustlers had hit his place again, this time getting away with 20 head of cattle. More troubling, he'd recognized one of them. "It was Carl Jensen," Pete said grimly. "Works at the mill in Tahlequah. I'd bet money his friends are mill workers too, probably hurting for money with the mill cutting back hours." Xander's expression grew hard. "Do you have proof?" "Just what I saw. But I'm riding to Tahlequah today to talk to the sheriff. Thought you should know in case they try your place again." After Pete left, the brothers held a council. If the rustlers were getting desperate, they might take bigger risks. The Triple Q needed better protection. "What if we set a trap?" Xavier suggested. "Make it look like we're leaving the herd unguarded, but actually be waiting for them." It was risky, but they couldn't afford to keep losing sleep and cattle. Xander reluctantly agreed. They'd set the trap in 3 days, giving them time to prepare. Nora hated the plan. The thought of Xander and Xavier deliberately putting themselves in danger made her sick with worry. But she understood the necessity. The ranch was their livelihood. Without it, they had nothing. The 3 days passed in tense preparation. The brothers cleaned their rifles, planned their positions, and tried to anticipate every possibility. Nora cooked their favorite meals as if good food could somehow keep them safe. The night before the trap, Xander came to Nora's room. She opened the door to find him looking uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I needed to see you," he said simply. She pulled him inside and they sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped. "I'm scared," Nora admitted. "What if something goes wrong?" "Xavier and I have been handling trouble since we were teenagers," Xander said. "We'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back." "I promise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone. "This was my mother's. I want you to have it." Nora stared at the ring. "Xander, what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me. Not someday, not eventually. Soon, as soon as we can arrange it. I know it's fast, but Nora, life is uncertain. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I want to spend whatever time I have as your husband." Tears streamed down Nora's face. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. They sealed the engagement with a kiss that quickly grew heated. Xander pulled back, breathing hard. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "This isn't proper." "Stay," Nora whispered. "Just hold me. I need to know you're here and safe." They lay down together on top of the covers, Xander's arms wrapped around Nora. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They talked in whispers until dawn, making plans for their future, dreaming of the life they'd build together. When the sun rose, Xander kissed her one more time and left to prepare for the night ahead. Nora spent the day in a fog of worry and anticipation. She prepared food, checked supplies, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. As darkness fell, the brothers rode out to set their trap. Nora was left alone in the house with instructions to lock all the doors and windows and not open them for anyone but Xander or Xavier. The hours crawled by. She tried to read, to do anything to occupy her mind. Nothing worked. Around midnight she heard gunshots in the distance. Her heart leaped into her throat. She ran to the window but could see nothing in the darkness. More shots echoed across the prairie. Then silence. The silence was worse than the gunshots. Nora paced the floor, praying, bargaining with God. If Xander came back safe, she'd be the best wife, the most grateful person. Please, please let him be all right. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, just before dawn, she heard hoofbeats. She flew to the door, yanking it open despite the instructions. Xander and Xavier rode into the yard, both upright in their saddles. Alive. Whole. Nora's knees nearly gave out with relief. She ran to them as they dismounted. "We got them," Xander said, catching her in his arms. 3 of them, including Carl Jensen. They're trussed up in the barn, waiting for the sheriff. "You're not hurt?" Nora demanded, running her hands over him, checking for wounds. "Not a scratch. They were so focused on the cattle they never saw us waiting. Whole thing was over in 5 minutes." Nora buried her face in his chest, shaking with relief. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll do my best," Xander promised, holding her tight. The sheriff arrived the next day to collect the rustlers. Pete Morrison had already filed his complaint, and with the Quinn brothers catching them in the act, the case was solid. The rustlers would face trial and likely prison time. With the threat resolved, life at the Triple Q settled into a peaceful routine. Xander and Nora began planning their wedding. Unlike her first attempt, this one felt joyful, full of hope instead of obligation. They decided on a simple ceremony at the ranch with just a few close neighbors and the preacher from Tahlequah. Nora didn't want a big fuss, and Xander was happy to give her whatever she wanted. The morning of the wedding, 3 weeks after the rustlers were caught, Nora woke early. She'd made her own dress, simple white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. As she dressed, she thought about the last time she'd worn a wedding dress. The difference was staggering. Then, she'd been nervous, uncertain, going through the motions. Now she was filled with absolute certainty. This was right. Xander was right. The ceremony took place in the ranch yard under a cloudless August sky. Pete Morrison stood up as Xander's witness, and Pete's wife Sarah stood with Nora. Xavier gave a short, heartfelt speech about how happy he was to officially gain a sister. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Nora half expected Thomas to appear, but of course he didn't. That chapter of her life was closed. "I do," Xander said clearly when asked if he took Nora as his wife. His eyes never left hers, full of love and promise. "I do," Nora echoed, meaning it with every fiber of her being. When the preacher pronounced them married, Xander kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and whistles of their small gathering. Nora laughed against his lips, happier than she'd ever been. The celebration was simple but joyful. Sarah Morrison had brought food and they set up tables in the yard. As the sun set, Pete pulled out a fiddle and there was dancing under the stars. Xander held Nora close and she felt like she was floating. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. "Blissfully," Nora answered. I feel like the luckiest man in the territory," Xander said. "I can't believe you're really mine." "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," Nora assured him. Later, after the guests had left and Xavier had tactfully decided to sleep in the barn to check on a mare who might be foaling, Xander carried Nora over the threshold of their home. Their home now, truly. He set her down gently in their bedroom, the room he'd moved into that afternoon, leaving his old room to Xavier. Nora had spent the week making it perfect, with fresh curtains and wildflowers on the dresser. "I love you," Xander said, cradling her face in his hands. "I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret this," Nora whispered. "You saved me, Xander, in every way a person can be saved." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and satisfied. Afterward, lying in Xander's arms, Nora felt a completeness she'd never known existed. The months that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. She threw herself into being a rancher's wife, learning about cattle and horses, keeping the books, making the triple Q not just survive but thrive. Xander proved to be an attentive, loving husband, considerate and passionate in equal measure. As autumn painted the prairie in gold and crimson, Nora began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Xander, wanting to be sure. One evening in late October, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby growing in there," she said softly. "Our baby." Xander's face transformed with joy. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to her stomach as if he could hear the tiny heartbeat. "A baby," he breathed. "Nora, I can't even." "I know," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "I feel the same way." Xavier was beside himself with excitement when they told him, "I'm going to be an uncle. Does this mean I get to teach the baby to ride?" "When they're old enough," Xander laughed. "Let's let them be born first." Winter settled over the ranch and Nora's pregnancy progressed. Despite some morning sickness, she felt strong and healthy. Xander fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from working too hard. It was sweet if occasionally frustrating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Nora protested when he tried to take over the laundry. "Humor me," Xander said. "I can't lose you, I won't lose you." His fear was understandable. His mother had died relatively young and childbirth was dangerous. Nora took his face in her hands. "I'm strong, and I'll have the doctor here. Everything will be fine." As her belly grew through the winter months, Nora felt more connected to the life growing inside her than she'd thought possible. She and Xander would sit by the fire in the evenings, his hand on her stomach feeling the baby kick and move. "Boy or girl?" Xavier would ask regularly. "Healthy is all that matters," Nora always answered, though privately she hoped for a son for Xander's sake, to carry on the Quinn name. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new calves. Nora's belly was huge now, and she moved slowly, uncomfortable but excited. The doctor came out from Tahlequah to check on her and pronounced everything normal. "Should be any day now," he said. "Send for me when the pains start." 3 days later, in the middle of the night, Nora woke to a sharp cramp. She waited, timing them as they'd been instructed. When they grew regular and stronger, she shook Xander awake. "It's time," she said. Xander flew into action, sending Xavier racing to town for the doctor, getting Nora settled, boiling water, doing all the things they'd planned. But he was clearly terrified, his hands shaking as he helped her. "I'm going to be fine," Nora assured him between contractions. "Women do this every day." "You're not just any woman," Xander said. "You're everything to me." The labor was long and difficult. The doctor arrived after 4 hours and took over, calm and professional. Xander held Nora's hand through it all, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow, refusing to leave despite the doctor suggesting he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Finally, as dawn broke on a beautiful April morning in 1877, their son entered the world with a healthy cry. The doctor cleaned him up and placed him in Nora's arms, and she felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. "A boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Xander, we have a son." Xander stared at the tiny bundle, his expression awed. "He's perfect. You're perfect." "I can't believe you did that." They named him Quinn Xander, after his father and grandfather. Little Quinn had his father's dark hair and what promised to be his mother's blue eyes. Xavier declared him the most beautiful baby ever born, though he looked fairly normal to everyone else. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Nora had never been so tired or so happy. Xander was a devoted father, walking the floor with Quinn when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with unconcealed adoration. "Thank you," he told Nora one night as they watched Quinn sleep in his cradle, "for giving me this, for choosing me. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "It's our life," Nora corrected, "and I wouldn't change a single thing about how we got here." As Quinn grew from infant to toddler, the Triple Q continued to prosper. They bought more land, hired 2 ranch hands to help with the expanding herd, and built an addition onto the house. Xavier courted and married a sweet girl named Emily from Tahlequah, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the property. 3 years after Quinn's birth, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth. 2 years after that came another son, Jacob Thomas. The house that had felt so empty when Nora first arrived was now bursting with life and laughter. Sometimes, Nora would think about that terrible day she'd been left at the altar, how it had felt like her life was ending. She'd believed Thomas Walker was her future, her only chance at happiness. How wrong she'd been. Thomas's abandonment had been the best thing that could have happened to her, though she'd never known it at the time. She learned through town gossip that Thomas had run off with a girl from Tulsa, and then left her too when he got bored. He'd moved somewhere west, leaving debts and broken promises in his wake. Nora felt nothing but pity for the boy who didn't know how to commit, how to love deeply. Her Aunt Judith had died a few years back, bitter and alone. Nora had attended the funeral out of duty, but felt no real sadness. Some people chose loneliness, chose judgment over love. Judith had been one of them. Martha and her husband Daniel had 4 children now. They'd made peace over the years, and Martha often visited the ranch with her brood. She'd apologized many times for turning away that day, and Nora had forgiven her. Life was too short for grudges. On Nora's 30th birthday, Xander surprised her with a party. The ranch yard filled with neighbors, friends, and their growing family. As she looked around at the life they'd built, at her husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon, at their 3 beautiful children, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Nora and Xander sat on the porch swing, watching the stars. It had become their tradition, these quiet moments together. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if Thomas had shown up that day?" Xander asked. Nora considered it. "Sometimes, but not with any real regret. I think I would have been content with Thomas, maybe even happy in a quiet, unremarkable way, but I never would have known this." She gestured at the ranch, at the life surrounding them. "I never would have known what it felt like to be truly, deeply loved, to build something meaningful with someone. You gave me that." "We gave each other that," Xander corrected. "I was just existing before you arrived, Nora, going through the motions. You brought light back into my life. Into this whole place." "We saved each other," Nora said. "That day in Tahlequah, we were both lost in different ways, and we found each other exactly when we needed to." Xander pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, hay and leather and home. After all these years, her heart still fluttered when he held her. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Nora whispered back. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." "Thank you for saying yes when I offered you my hand," Xander replied, "for taking a chance on a stranger and a rough ranch in the middle of nowhere." "Best decision I ever made," Nora said firmly. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through grass. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish. But tonight was perfect, a snapshot of contentment. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and growth. Quinn grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Jacob was the gentle one, more interested in books than cattle. The Triple Q became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Xander's fair dealing and hard work earned respect throughout the region. Nora became known for her kindness, often taking in strays, both animal and human, who needed help, just as she'd once been helped. When Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, the Quinn family celebrated with the rest of the territory. Quinn was 30 years old by then, married with children of his own. Rose had married a doctor and lived in town. Jacob had gone east to university, though he wrote regularly and visited when he could. Xander and Nora were in their 50s now, their hair graying but their love still strong. They'd weathered droughts and harsh winters, market crashes and personal losses. Through it all, they'd held tight to each other, and the family they'd built on their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Someone had unearthed the old photograph from their wedding day, and they all marveled at how young Nora and Xander had looked. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren begged. "About how Grandma was left at the altar." Nora and Xander exchanged a smile. They'd told the story many times over the years, watching it become family legend. "Well," Nora began, settling into her chair with several grandchildren gathered at her feet. "It was June of 1876, and I was standing in the Tahlequah church in my wedding dress, waiting for a groom who never came." She told the familiar tale, Xander adding details here and there. The children listened raptly, even though they'd heard it before. It never got old, this story of heartbreak transformed into joy. "And your grandfather rode up on his horse and said I could come with him," Nora finished. "The most important words anyone ever spoke to me." "What happened to the other guy?" a grandson asked. "The one who left you?" "He died alone in California about 10 years back," Xander said. "Never married, never settled. Spent his whole life running from one thing to the next." "I feel sorry for him," Nora said honestly. "He never learned that real happiness comes from commitment, from choosing someone and building a life together. He missed out on the best parts of being human." That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Nora and Xander found themselves back on the porch swing, just as they'd done thousands of times before. 30 years, Xander mused. "Feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I'd do it all again," Nora said. "Every moment, every challenge, it all led here." "I used to wonder why my mother made me promise to help people in need," Xander said. "Seemed like a strange thing to be so insistent about, but now I understand. She knew that sometimes helping someone else is really helping yourself." "I thought I was saving you that day in Tahlequah. Turns out you were saving me right back." "We're a good team," Nora agreed. "The best," Xander said, kissing her temple. "Here's to 30 more years." 30 more years, Nora echoed, though they both knew that might not be realistic. But they had today and tomorrow, and that was enough. As they grew older, they began to slow down. The ranch was Quinn's now, with his father and mother in advisory roles. Xander's joints ached in the morning, and Nora's eyesight wasn't what it used to be. But they still had each other, and that made everything bearable. On a crisp autumn morning in 1915, Xander suffered a heart attack while out checking fence lines. Quinn found him and brought him home, where the doctor said there was nothing to be done. Xander's heart was simply wearing out. Nora held his hand as he lay in their bed, the same bed where they'd shared 37 years of marriage, where their children had been conceived, where they'd laughed and cried and loved. "I'm not ready to let you go," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know, love," Xander said, his voice weak but steady. "But we had a good run, didn't we? Better than either of us could have imagined." "The best," Nora agreed. You gave me everything, Xander. A home, a family, love beyond measure. You gave me the same, Xander said. That day I saw you on the church steps. Something in my heart knew, this is her, this is the one. I'm glad I listened. Me too, Nora said, pressing her lips to his weathered hand. Their children gathered around the bed, saying their goodbyes. Quinn held his father's other hand, trying to be strong. Rose sobbed openly. Jacob read passages from their father's favorite poems. As the sun set, painting the Oklahoma sky in brilliant reds and golds, Xander took his last breath with his family surrounding him and his beloved wife's hand in his. He went peacefully, a slight smile on his face, ready for whatever came next. Nora felt like part of her soul had been ripped away. The pain was crushing, unbearable. But she had their children, their grandchildren, the legacy of love they'd built together. She would survive this, because Xander would want her to. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over the state to pay their respects to a man who'd been respected and loved by all who knew him. Nora stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the love of her life. In the years that followed, Nora found peace in her memories and her family. She lived in the house Xander had built, surrounded by reminders of their life together. She told stories to her great-grandchildren, keeping his memory alive. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch swing alone, but she never felt truly alone. She could almost feel Xander beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his voice in the wind. Nora lived to be 82 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1936. Her last words to Quinn were about his father. "Tell him I'm coming," she whispered. "Tell him to wait for me." They buried her beside Xander on a hill overlooking the Triple Q, under a sky so vast, it seemed to stretch into eternity. The inscription on her headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She was left at the altar with nowhere to go and found everything she needed. The Quinn family continued to run the Triple Q for generations. The story of Xander and Nora became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, that kindness creates ripples that last long after we're gone, and that true love, when found, is worth every risk. In that little church in Tahlequah, where Nora had once stood abandoned, weddings continued. And sometimes, when a bride was nervous or uncertain, someone would tell her about Nora Louise, who'd been left at that very altar and had gone on to find a love so deep and true, it became the stuff of legend. The message was always the same. Sometimes the life we plan isn't the life we're meant to live. Sometimes heartbreak is actually a door opening, leading us toward something better than we could have imagined. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to extend a hand and say, "You can come with me," to change the entire trajectory of a life. The Triple Q still stands today, run by Xander and Nora's descendants, a testament to what two people can build when they choose each other and refuse to give up. The porch swing where they spent so many evenings has been replaced several times, but there's always a swing there, always a place to sit and watch the sunset and remember, because some love stories end. But the best ones, the truest ones, they echo through time, inspiring and reminding us that love, real love, is always worth the risk.